this video, I will be talking about the history of music in films. I've chosen films from through the decades to see the evolution of how music has changed or how it hasn't changed over the years. It will be interesting to see how the music evolves with the film, as I have already done a video on how the trailers have adapted over the years, so the trailers in general. What I'm saying is that in this video, I'm focusing on the music and how the music has evolved over the years. I'll be focusing on the most famous pieces of music from trailers to see how they have changed over the years and how they have adapted to the film they are advertising. So I want to see how they've adapted to make the music more modern day, and I also want to see how they adapt the music to their trailer and see if that's changed over the years. From this video, I hope this research will help me and my music in my film trailer. So it'll help me create the best piece of music I can for my film trailer. So the first movie I decided to research was Psycho from the 1960s. I actually used this in my original trailer timeline history. The reason I want to use it again is because Psycho has one of the most famous sound effects / soundtracks in movie history. Everyone's heard of the Psycho sound effect / soundtrack, and I would just be stupid not to talk about it. And I also really want to talk about it is because it's one of my favourite pieces of soundtrack from a movie ever. The way it can be used in multiple situations, I really like. But I talk more about that in here, so let's get into it. The music used in Psycho is one of the most iconic music pieces ever made. It uses very high-pitched sounds to keep the audience on the edges of their seats and keeps the suspense atmosphere high. It has become such an iconic theme that films and television series often use it to homage the film. So this is a great example of how to make your music last through the ages. So even though I think the Psycho soundtrack is a bit outdated in some ways, because I just don't feel like it has the same effect that it used to have on audiences. But I also think that it is successful because people use it all the time. It's in countless television programs and countless films. Maybe not always used in the way that it was intended to back in the 1960s, but it has, in a way, stood the test of time. It does still keep the audience on the edge of their seats if used in the right place. And I don't really see how this can't be seen as successful. And as I said, it uses very high-pitched sounds. The high-pitched sounds are good, and they work really well, because they make it kind of this uneasy noise to listen to, quite eerie. But at the same time, they can get quite repetitive and quite annoying if it's used in too long of a dose. And obviously it does get lowered down in sections, but it mainly focuses on the really high-pitched sound, and it does get quite annoying, and you don't tend to see it in movies nowadays. I might be wrong, and want to do more research, but as it stands right now, I don't feel like you would need to. Thought through the music has a suspenseful atmosphere which it creates, such as an overwhelming feel when you hear it. It makes you feel overwhelmed sometimes because of that high-pitched sound. However, due to the homages being paid to this film, it has become something of a comedy soundtrack rather than being paid in comedy films and creating a different atmosphere than the film originally intended. So I said a little bit about this, but now I'll focus on it more because it works quite well as a comedy soundtrack, but that's kind of not what it was made for. It was made to be quite a horrifying sound, and it gets paid in quite the one that sticks off my head is The Simpsons, which used it in a comedy purpose to kind of take the mickey, you could say, out of Psycho the film, which I feel is a bit not disrespectful because it's still paying homage to it, but it just kind of twists the music in a different kind of direction than what it was supposed to use. Now, it wasn't to say unsuccessful because it did create fear back in the audiences in the 1960s, and it depends on how you look at it. It has stood the test of time if you think about it in the way that people still listen to this in movies and it's still used, but it isn't successful if you say that during this time it hasn't kept to what it was supposed to be, which was a thriller film soundtrack. This is a shame, as it's a great piece of music which for its time creates terror in its audience, as they did not know what was about to happen. Unfortunately, this is part of music history and proves how sounds can change perception to the audience over the years. So, starting off as being a horror/thriller film soundtrack, turning into a comedy soundtrack. The sound went from being in a thriller film to a comedy flick, which is just how music changes, which means in future the music for thriller films will keep changing to create suspense. So films will continuously change their music over the years to create a more frightening soundtrack. Once we hear a certain beat so many times, it gets boring and doesn't really strike fear in us anymore. So this just proves that music changes, and if it doesn't change, it will change in the way that we perceive it. So as I said, horror film soundtrack could turn into something of a comedy, much like the Psycho film has. Now we move on to in the future from this film, in the 1970s. Now, to no surprise, the film that I picked was Jaws. And I don't just pick these films because they're generic, but because you'd be silly not to, because they was the most influential piece of music of that decade. So Jaws, much like Psycho, has established a great following when it comes to its soundtrack. However, unlike Psycho, it has not been changed into a comedy sound for future purposes, and remains one of the most intense and respected pieces of music, not only in film, but in the music world. And the thing that I really like about Jaws' music is that it has a mix of fast pace, but slow paced music as well. It works really well in the way that you can quite easily see this in every scene of Jaws, and it would just work. You'd have to extend the music to fit in with the intense and slower parts of the film, but it would work. However, unlike Psycho, you couldn't do that because people have already made an establishment for that as being comedy, whereas Jaws is still seen as a very intense piece of music. And it is a very intense piece of music. The instruments are much more deep and mellow. They create more of an echo type sound. They also feel much darker. It doesn't feel like something that you might get from a comedy film, a bit like Psycho. It feels like something bad is going to happen within this film. And also it does, people die. So the music does a great job of conveying what the director intends to do in this film. Steven Spielberg, John Williams pulled off magically in his music, and obviously that was to make people afraid to go in the water, and to no surprise it succeeded. And a huge part of that was not just to do with the filmmaking, it was to do with the music and how people, if someone started singing the Jaws themes and someone swimming in the water, they'd almost immediately run out. It has stood the test of time even today, because even today people tend to get a bit fearful if they hear that sound. Not as in like, oh, I'm scared. And you could say it's turned into a bit of a comedy, but not within film. And I just think that it's a really great piece of music. The sound slowly builds until reaching the peak, creating a chase-like atmosphere between a predator and its prey. However, the film helps cement this music, as the film has a thriller plotline, making us as humans the bait for a terrifying shark. This made the music even more terrifying, making it feel as if the audience were the bait to this monstrous shark. The music has become a piece of history, becoming an influence to many other music composers. The soundtrack is truly terrifying and uses high-pitched sounds and a fast pace to make us as the audience feel intimidated and creates an intense atmosphere when watching the film. Overall, this music remains untouched and still holds up today, still being one of the scariest and intense pieces of music ever made on the silver screen, or shown on the silver screen, I should say. And that is also something that really inspires me about Jaws, is how it stands the test of time. You've got to create a piece of music which, for the contemporary audience, works, but for the past audience works, and for the future audience. So that may not mean contemporary audience, obviously us now. Perhaps you could use the future audience as people who would have watched Jaws when, they were in their young adult life. You may not be able to test the future, but you can still do something away with feeling how music is evolving by watching other trailers and then making yours not quite as evolved as that, but somewhere in between. Anyway, Jaws did something where it created fear into its audience, much like Psycho. So there is a pattern in these movies seem to be creating fear in their audience, perhaps maybe to get them enjoy the music more. Coincidentally, it could be also used because that's just the way music is still the same. It hasn't evolved. Either way, I believe that from this point the music has evolved, and as we move into our next film, we'll be able to see if the intense atmospheres and the fast-paced, high-pitched sounds are still there. The next film that I'll be talking about is from the 1980s, and it is The Shining. Another really famous film that everyone talks about, but again, I wouldn't really say it's because it's easy. I would say because it's so influential, and how could you not talk about the soundtrack for this film? So, the reason I chose The Shining is because the soundtrack to that really stands out to me, because I don't really feel like it's, you could say, I don't feel like it's what you would expect from a film like this. For starters, the title doesn't convey anything to do with what you think the film would be about. And there's a lot of aspects within the film that don't really make sense. This whole film doesn't really make sense. And that's why I think it works really, really well. And that's why I think I like it so much. So let's get into what I've wrote about it rather than me just rambling. The Shining soundtrack is very menacing and creates fear in its audience. In the opening of the film, there are some beautiful shots of the countryside, but the music playing is very menacing and suspenseful, which completely changes the images I am seeing and shows the importance of music and how it can completely change the feel of a scene. So, and if you haven't seen The Shining, you might not know what I'm talking about, but I'll describe it. There's this beautiful shot of scenery on the mountain ranges, and it's bright and it's colourful and it looks fabulous. But the music playing is very, very intimidating. It's very dark. It's very vivid. It makes you feel uneasy, and it makes you wonder why they're playing this type of music over such beautiful shots. But it works really well because it completely suits the style and the theme of the film. Because there's quite a lot of things in this film that doesn't really make sense, and so the music had to kind of go along with that. The music couldn't be something for a normal thriller film. Instead, it had to be something that suited the film. And that's something I want to point out. From the three films I've talked about, they have all stood and kept to the themes of the film rather than, going off a tangent. And it worked, and that is a perfect example of what The Shining does really well. And the contrapuntal sound works really well as well, I think, as I feel that it just makes the audience think a little bit more, and it doesn't just feel like something you would see in every single thriller film. So the music works well. However, as it keeps the audience interested, it is what is happening on screen and waits for something to happen, which is because of the music. So basically, the music implies that something is going to happen, that's what keeps the audience on their seats. And also, they keep thinking something's going to happen, something's going to happen. They're going to crash, But the music makes them think that, but the scenery says otherwise, which is why they kind of conflict with each other, which is a really great technique, because it makes the audience question themselves into what they're seeing and what their eyes are seeing, because you know what they say, eyes are deceiving. The eerie sense the soundtrack for this film gives to the audience makes them expect that something will happen at every turn, which keeps them on the edge of their seats as they wait in suspense to what will happen. This has given me an idea for my trailer. As if I keep the music intense, for the whole trailer, my audience will keep watching, and then they come back to the full film when it releases. The music has changed from the previous year, as now the music is getting more intense and repetitive through a trailer. And obviously Jaws was quite repetitive, but this music seems more repetitive, and it also takes itself a bit more seriously. Now, you could say that The Shining's soundtrack is nowhere near as famous as Psycho or Jaws, which in some ways is bad, but in some ways it's good, because the good thing about, even though this was only, you could say, 35 years ago, that's a long time, actually, thinking about it, but 37 years ago, you could still say that it works today, because if you listen to it today, unlike Jaws or Psycho, it's not that intimidating, but The Shining's soundtrack would be quite intimidating because it's not overplayed. So getting your music really well known is one thing, but keeping it true to the film and keeping it what it was intended to make is another. And every time you watch this film, and every time you see those opening shots, you always get the same fear factor that you got the first time you watched it. So that is why The Shining is a great piece of music, and it shows how it is developing and keeping to its themes over the decades. Now we move on to the 1990s, and much like in my inspirational music, I have chosen a film from that has inspired me quite a bit, and that film is Jurassic Park. The Jurassic Park theme song is a huge part of music history, as it is very big in the music and film industry, and it's big to me as well. It's such a huge influence on my music that I couldn't help but add it into music history, because it's probably inspired countless others. Not to mention, it's a very unique style of music compared to what we are used to in these types of action thriller films. And that's why I wanted to see how if this has changed from the previous years. The sound is more majestic than it is intense, as it sets the scene for a place which is magical and sets up a beautiful piece of music. The reason this music is so good, as it is what was not what you expect from an intense thriller film about dinosaurs. Instead, it was a majestically beautiful, which created a great piece of music. This has changed film music over the years, as it wasn't now about creating a certain atmosphere for a certain type of film. Now it is about creating bigger atmosphere, which can be used at multiple points during a scene/film, which doesn't have to be intense, but can be a happy scene or a scary scene. It doesn't have to fit every single part of the film, is what I'm trying to say. Yes, this music can be used more than one time in Jurassic Park, because there's lots of beautiful scenery. But what I'm trying to say is that it isn't as important to create this type of music where it can only be used at one part during the film. It's now about making that piece of music stand out in the section of films that it is used in. The Jurassic Park theme song made a feeling inside people and put them in a good mood, as the music was soft and slowly built up to create an awesome sounding music piece. This has inspired me to use this music in creating my music. Creating a piece of music which sounded inspiring and could be used in a multiple points in the final film, but also kept the trailer entertaining so that they would come and watch the full film. And what I really enjoy about the Jurassic Park music is the fact that even though it doesn't necessarily convey the best parts of Jurassic Park, we say best parts, the most famous parts of Jurassic Park, and it's used at the beginning and the end of the film. However, it still could be played over those intense pieces of music, and it would give them a completely different feel, and the music a completely different feel. It'd be like contrapuntal sound like they did in The Shining. And this does show how music has come a long way since its early start in 1960s when we started this video. It has become something of an icon, this piece of music. It also creates an atmosphere for the audience where they believe this could be real, like anything is possible, because the music is so upbeat and lifting that people genuinely think that this piece of music is, you know, it's wonderful. And it truly is wonderful, and I love every part of this music. And it most importantly shows the distance it's come from the 1960s, as the music is not such as intense than it is majestic and, you know, light-hearted. The music nowadays isn't about being very, very intense like it was. It's kind of taken a drift back and a step back to admire what it is and admire what it has created. So going forward in this video into the last section of the current day music, it will be interesting to see if we still don't need that intense music, or if it's something that needs to be something that has returned and retains. The final film in my music history timeline is from the 2000s to the current day, and the film is What Lies Beneath. Now, I haven't seen What Lies Beneath as much as the other films on this list, but I still believe that the music soundtrack creates a really nice and intense piece of music for this film. And I also believe that without the music soundtrack in this film would not have as near as much intensity as it does, nor do I think that the film would be as successful as it is. It's because of the music which made the film quite scary and suspenseful. And you can say that about quite a lot of films, but if you took out the soundtrack in this film, you just wouldn't have the same effect. And it just probably wouldn't be scary. And this film is very scary if you watch it late at night by yourself with the volume up because of the music. What Lies Beneath music creates an intense, eerie atmosphere and creates a feel to its film what completely heightens the horror of the film and makes it scary when the horror and music is played together, which creates a beautiful piece of filmmaking which will keep the audience interested in the film, and it will keep the horror in the film at a high level. And it has to be matched with intense music to create a scary atmosphere for the audience. This shows that the music is updated as it becomes clearer and more hip-hop and pop-based intense music is. Still the same in the way it had to create the same atmosphere as they did 40 years ago, which is to make the audience scared and feel uneasy so they enjoy the film as if they came to the horror / thriller film because they want to be scared. That's why they came to see this type of film. This music has inspired me as I want to create music which is intense for my trailer to capture the audience's attention, as if they are captured by its suspenseful atmosphere, they will want to come back and see the full movie, and the music creates an intense atmosphere which they want to find out more about and enjoy the film. And obviously, What Lies Beneath, it's a brilliant piece of filmmaking, the film, but the music is just so intense. It once again creates an intense atmosphere which puts it on a level where it is very scary. So over the years, the music has changed. They've become more clear. It's become clearer. It's become much more fast-paced. However, it has maintained the fact that it has to suit its film and retains the intensity. So overall, from this video, I have learned that music changes through the years, so it does evolve. It's obvious that music evolves through the years, much like the trailers have. Much like the trailers themselves, the music adapts to the era and how it continues to grab the audience's attention so that they enjoy the music and the trailer together. Because the music is just as important as the trailer itself. If the trailer has no sound or music that doesn't suit it, then the audience will not be inspired by the trailer and not want to come and watch the full film. I have learned from this video that my music must match the theme of my thriller film trailer. It must stand out to the audiences so that they remember the trailer and want to come back and watch the final film. Overall, this video has been beneficial into my research and planning, as I know I feel I'm getting closer to the perfect trailer, as I'm getting closer into making the best piece of music I can.